It is very clear that the US-Israeli relations in our current era is considered a special relationship in diplomacy, and it is characterized by an exception that we rarely get to see in contemporary international relations, which is a relationship that resembles that of a father with his son who supports him in all circumstances. And no matter how inappropriate or bad the son's behaviors are, it is natural to see that the father continues his support because he's his blood and flesh. We see that United States diplomatic relations with the rest of the world's countries are based on certain conditions and standards that the US allies must respect. But when it comes to Israel, those conditions and standards go out of the window. The international community believes that no matter how Israel behaves towards its neighbor and opponents, no matter how brutal and how exaggeratedly it violates the international law, America continues its unconditional and unlimited support for the Zionist state and does not impose any big major sanctions, such as banning the sale of weapons, cutting off financial support, and withdrawing diplomatic support from it in the UN Security Council. And the US policymakers always respond with either ignoring Israel's actions or at most imposing very few and light sanctions on Israeli settlers of the West Bank. But why? This is what we'll answer. After the Balfour Declaration in 1917 to establish a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine, the former American president from the Democratic Party, Woodrow Wilson, rushed to endorse the declaration and support the establishment of a Zionist Jewish state in the Promised Land according to the Jewish belief, which is Palestine, as he said. At the same time, the American Congress passed a resolution called Lodge Fish, stating the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people on September 21, 1922. United States is considered to be the first country in history to recognize the State of Israel and its establishment. Before that, the United Nations approved Resolution 181 stating the partition of the land of Palestine and given 56% to the Jewish state while given 42% to the Arab state, plus keeping only 2%, which represents the cities of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, under international administration. After the resolution, the Jewish People's Council, under the leadership of its president David Ben-Gurion, announced the establishment of the Jewish state under the UN's resolution given borders and agreed on the name of Israel on May 14, 1948, plus establishing an Israeli provisional government. The latter sent a special telegram to the US administration requesting an American recognition of the provisional government, and indeed, the American administration responded positively and recognized it, although the de jure recognition took place on January 31, 1949. The United States always tries to guarantee Israel's superiority to all countries located in the Middle East in order to deter any attempts to threaten its security and existence from potentially any hostile neighboring Arab country. Because Arab people, whether Egyptians, Syrians, Jordanians, or others, in most cases have not completely accepted the idea of the existence of the Hebrew state on their doorstep. As a result, US continues to support it by all means in a huge and large way, while either trying to weaken neighboring hostile countries or forcing other Arab leaders to establish and normalize diplomatic relations with Israel. The US always provides support to Israel in all its forms, as it supports the Israeli economy by providing massive financial aid, which by 2022 it has reached around $150 billion since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, while facilitating its access to loans with low interests from American commercial banks to help it overcome tough times, such as the economic crisis occurred between 2000 and 2003 after the outbreak of the Palestinian uprising against Sharon's government. On the military side, the US supports the Israeli Defense Forces through the QME program, as the American administration is always keen on making the Israeli military superior to all the armies of neighboring countries, such as Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, through providing the most powerful, most modern, and most advanced weapons in the world, including warplanes, tanks, and intelligence tools that hear the steps of ants in the dark. Perhaps this became clear after the outbreak of the latest war between Israel and the Palestinian factions ruling the Gaza Strip, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad on October 7th, where Israel committed massive violations of international law by making genocidal statements from Israeli politicians, targeting civilians with aerial bombardment, starving the Gazan people, and targeting vital infrastructure such as hospitals and religious buildings such as mosques. And after all of this, America has never stopped its support that it was sending in the past, but rather maintained it. And when it comes to dealing with public relations pressure, US politicians either ignore the voices calling for a ban of arms sales and look the other way, or they make a verbal condemnation and impose very light sanctions on Israeli settlers in the West Bank. But at the end of the day, no major coercive measures imposed by the US policymakers on Israel. It is known that the issue of criticizing Israel represents a red line and the real terror for many people in the US, as lobbyists linked to Israeli government in America influence many media outlets, universities, movie production companies, and political parties by supporting them with money and perhaps, I say perhaps because I do not have evidence, using blackmail by threatening politicians, media figures, academic professors, artists, and sports athletes to reveal their sexual or financial scandals in order to put pressure on them and silence their voice from criticizing the Zionist state. Just to make a clear point, after World War II, the United States became the leader and main protector of the Christian-dominated Western civilization and its torchbearer. Therefore, Westerners, most of the time, see America's interests as their own. Let's jump to the reasons. The presence of Israel in ensuring its superiority over the Muslim-majority countries of the Middle East guarantees the Americans the protection of their strategic interests in that region. The United States has always believed that Israel is a functional and inclined state with the task of guaranteeing Uncle Sam's interests and no more, as its presence also facilitates the access to oil, which is abundant in that region, and ensures the security of navigation for American commercial and military ships in the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. Israel, with American support, deters any attempt to overthrow the balance of power in the region. Perhaps the current events occurring now against the hostile Palestinian factions and the Houthis are the best proof for what we're talking about. One of the most important reasons for the US administration's support for Israel without any restrictions, conditions, or limits is the dominance of the Israeli lobby in the American political decision-making arena, led by organizations such as AIPAC and Christians United for Israel. These organizations, which defend the Israeli interests in the United States, influence decision-makers among American politicians by supporting the presidential or congressional election campaigns of various candidates with money and votes, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. This has led many candidates to rely on the lobby's support in order to increase their chances to win the elections, and when they win, elect politicians literally implement what these Israeli-sponsored lobbies ask of them. I recommend that viewers read the book The Israel Lobby, written by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, which explains in a brilliant way the extent of the influence of the Israel lobby on American politics. It is known about the Jews that they are the most oppressed and persecuted ethnic group that has ever existed in all of history, from all civilizations, especially the Christian-dominated Western civilization. After the Inquisition in Spain, plus the policies of apartheid pursued against them throughout Europe between the 16th and 19th centuries, up until the Holocaust that was carried out by the Nazi regime against them and killing around 6 million Jews, America, the leader of Western civilization after World War II, saw it as its moral duty to take care of the Jews and ensure their security and prosperity in the Promised Land. This would be an invisible reason for many people, but Israel's presence in the Middle East disperses and divides the Islamic nation, which in the Western subconscious mind is considered its eternal enemy from the days of the Crusades up to the First World War and the entry of British General Allenby into Jerusalem. And division is what we're currently seeing now in the Islamic world. There are several Muslim countries that have normalized relations with Israel, and there are other Muslim countries that are still resistant to the idea of an Israeli presence in Palestine. Divide and conquer is always the norm. This is the million-dollar question. But the answer, in the eyes of Interpol's finest, is easy. America is the one that has more leverage over Israel for one reason, and an example can be given in order to justify our argument. The reason is that Israel depends almost entirely on the United States to ensure its security and existence. For example, in the war that is taking place now in Gaza, most of the Israeli military's armament is imported from the US, and few is made in Israel. And also without an American veto in UN Security Council, the Gaza war would not have continued after 6 months. Historically, the United States of America has many times pressured the Israeli administration into accepting decisions that were against its desires and against the desires of many Israeli politicians. Perhaps the most prominent example is Israel's acceptance of a peace treaty with the Palestine Liberation Organization and its recognition of the Palestinian Authority's rule over the West Bank and Gaza. This peace treaty was against the desire of the Israeli elite, who until today does not want to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state.